Dr. Katina, welcome to the Play Inspired podcast. Here we're going to talk about your journey towards as you examine your life, the things you've learned, how it's affected your day-to-day life, and how it's affected your work. And yeah, so having said that, give us a little bit of an intro and give us a little sneak peek of what it's like inside your world.
Sure. So thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I am currently an assistant professor of management at the George Washington University School of Business. And I also am a co-founder of a workplace wellness organization called Worker Being. And that organization aims to spread awareness about the science of workplace wellness, which I can talk a little bit more about. And my day-to-day basically looks like researching in the area of most of my work is around diversity and inclusion as a pillar of wellness. So researching how diversity and inclusion impacts individuals' organizational lives, as well as organizations overall. And then teaching courses, mostly around diversity and globalization, some on strategic human resource management, and then also spending time talking about and consulting on issues around wellness with companies and corporations. So that's my day-to-day.
Wow. Yeah. When you say workplace or wellness in general, you don't even think about the diversity and inclusion. You're always thinking about healthy mind and body. I didn't even think that. I thought diversity and inclusion is a whole different realm. But I guess, yeah, it does make sense because it does affect the dynamic in the workplace a lot.
Yeah, definitely. The feeling of being included or excluded, just from a human perspective, is really important for predicting outcomes with regards to your attitude about your job, your attitude about your life, your ability to perform at the highest potential that you have. All of those sorts of things come into play when you're either accepted or rejected by a social group that has some meaning or value to you. And so the idea of inclusion is really, really crucial for individuals and for organizations. And of course, it becomes more difficult or complicated when we're talking about having people experience inclusion amongst groups where people make assumptions that they're not similar to one another. So that's where some of the complications, diversity and inclusion come into play.
Huh. Awesome. Yeah. So what were the events that led you towards exploring this area of work?
Yeah, sure. So I think that one of the big things for me was that I was always very interested in issues around social justice, starting basically like in later high school and then really in college. I became really interested. I took a class on poverty, which was a really impactful course for me in the sociology department. And I went to Villanova for undergrad. And so I had this really great professor there who really made me think about the world around me a little bit differently. And I started participating in a lot of community work and things of that nature to get a sense of what the community around me looked like. And when I went on to grad school, I entered into a PhD program for industrial organizational psychology. And that is basically the psychology of work. So how individuals can work well together, teamwork, leadership, wellness. Also, how do you train people? How do you praise their performance? How do you select the right person for the right job? So all these different components of sort of creating healthy work environments. And while I loved IO psychology and still love IO psychology, a little piece was missing for me. And so I found out about a dual PhD program with gender and women's studies at Penn State, where I did my degree. And so I decided to sign up for that program as well. So having both of those things going on at once, really learning about how do you create both productive and healthy places for people to work. And then also kind of critiquing societal systems and learning about the history of feminist movements and how society has moved forward globally and also not from an equity perspective. Those two conversations together sort of led me to be interested in these issues of workplace equity. And that's where I ended up focusing my dissertation. And I continue to focus my research now, and what spawned my interest in co-creating Worker Being with my business partner, Patricia, who also went to Penn State with me and was in the IO Psych program with me. So that's kind of how I came to be interested in these issues. And I continue to be more and more interested in them because they're of their continued relevance and necessity, I think, societally.
Mm-hmm. So I want to touch on a little bit about the mental health aspect of the workplace, because it's one of the biggest things that I struggled with back in the day when I was working downtown, and it was one of the things, stressed, unhealthy, and just plain miserable without really realizing it until you admit certain things to yourself that, oh shoot, yeah, I do hate this. So
Yep.
yeah, but most of the time is you're always putting up that front of, "Huh, it's do this," because you're trying to please certain leadership in order to advance towards the ladder. So how, as a leader, how can you provide that space of express yourself to your team, that it's okay to express yourself, you're not going to be penalized,
Yeah.
right word right now, but yeah, that you won't be punished for it, for expressing,
Yeah.
because that's one of the things that really I kept my mouth shut, because I was always afraid to say something and to disturb the peace.
Yeah, I think that's really a great question. And I think the biggest thing that a leader can do to demonstrate that it's okay to have these conversations, it's okay to be authentic, is to role model that for their teams. So if you have a leader who's saying, hey, come to me whenever you want if you have an issue, or, if you need an accommodation, or I'm really open minded to talking about anybody who's, dealing with mental health challenge or something like that, right? But if they're never open or transparent, they always seem like it's a very like, strict, this is my work personality, very buttoned up, you're not going to get to know me outside of work, or not showing genuine emotions, hiding a lot about their personal selves or lives, you're going to get the sense that they're saying that because they feel like they have to say that, but that if I want to get ahead here, that's not the way that leaders behave. So if you see yourself as a leader or potential leader, you're getting the sense that, well, I can't do that if I want this person to see me as similar to them. And
Mhm.
so leaders really need to do is role model these behaviors to show that they're vulnerable and authentic. There's a really interesting body of literature on leader humility, which is this idea that leaders role model that they don't know all the answers, that they can learn from other people, that they are willing to get to know others on a personal level and incorporate that into their management style. So this idea of sort of a more permeable boundary between leader and follower, as opposed to a hierarchical structure where it feels like, yeah, come to me if you have a problem, but you're not sure how people are going to judge that problem that you bring.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and it sometimes, like, leaders just can be so out of touch. At least that's how I
Yeah.
felt at the time. Yeah, they could be
Yeah.
pretty out of touch. So, how would you say that they could connect with their team without, like, obviously you can't host team buildings every other day. So,
Yes.
how could they get in touch and give that feel of, we are in the trenches with you and we
Sure.
understand?
Yeah, I think that really it's not anything grandiose that people have to do. It's these micro behaviors that let people know that it's okay to be themselves, but also that you operate as a unit, that you're there for each other. So it doesn't need to be a big, we're going to go do a ropes course, or like, go ride in ATVs or whatever people do when they're trying to do team building, but rather that you have an ongoing and constant line of communication,
Hmm.
that you role model that it's okay for people to reach out, that the leader reaches out sometimes to just check in and see how things are going, that all your conversations are not task focused, that sometimes they're also focused around how things are going personally with people, checking in to make sure that their needs are being addressed, having conversations about their broader career goals, right? And how this fits into those goals. So really personalizing the experience on a micro level, as opposed to trying to think about doing a big broad scale intervention that you do every couple, months or whatever the
Hmm.
case is, actually a much more sustainable way to lead for wellness than trying to, orchestrate something that happens infrequently, but is larger in scale, actually has less impact than smaller things that are more consistent.
Right. Mm, yeah. So another thing that I always, like, notice is that there's no in between. It's like you have this leader who's like so rough and like, I'm the leader, and just wagging their power around,
Yeah.
wagging their power around. And then you have this one who's like extremely nice and getting taken advantage of. So how do you find the balance in there where you are the leader, I have, like, you're showing empathy, sympathy, all that good stuff, without getting taken advantage of?
Yeah. I think that there's a difference between building a strong team culture and being a pushover as a leader, or not being taken seriously. So, one of the best ways to gain buy in is to use participative or collaborative methods, right? So, I can be really participative and collaborative and have everyone come to a shared decision together, with my input and guidance as potentially the more senior person, right? Where we all sort of shape the conversation and come to a place that we all think is the best place, without having to and make everyone feel a part of that and have everyone truly be a part of that, without being completely steamrolled or led by the team. So you should be able to be comfortable as a leader saying, I'm hearing all these thoughts. These are great thoughts. Here's something that I think we need to continue thinking about, or here's another angle on it that might be worthwhile considering, and sort of getting people to come to a conclusion that's shared, as opposed to either you're driving it. That's not great that you're just always feeding people what they're supposed to be doing, or you're getting pushed. They're always feeding you what you're doing and you're not in charge anymore. So I think the idea is to create a collaborative environment where everyone is able to be heard and weigh in on their perspective.
Mm, awesome. So one more thing.
Yeah.
Just the thing, yeah. So when I was first starting this out, I didn't even pay attention. I thought I was being inclusive and diverse until I realized I looked at the staff and I'm like, all female, all mostly white. Wait, I'm the diversity hire and I'm the boss. So start paying attention to these things. Like, I mean, and then I felt the same way when I was working downtown back in the day. I'm like, whoa, I'm the diversity hire around here. So how do you start incorporating inclusion and like just that whole dynamic in the workplace?
Yeah, well, I think that the conclusion that you came to is sort of reflective of self-reflection, right? So you have enough awareness to sort of come to that conclusion on your own. Hey, I'm either surrounding myself with people who look more like me in some ways, or I'm gravitating towards hires that look a particular way. I wonder why that is, or starting to think about, well, why have people been gravitating towards me? And so I think that starting point is actually a really good one for leaders or anybody that wants to enhance their inclusivity, is to start doing that self-reflection on where are your blind spots, right? So
Mm-hmm.
really good exercise to do is to think about your closest friend group and say, okay, if you think about your group of closest friends, the people that know the most about you, that you get most of your information from, that you have the deepest conversations with, what are the demographic identities of those people on a variety of different bases? So not just gender and race, but also sexual orientation, religion, ability, like what does that circle look like? And start to think about, well, why is that the case, right? Like, so most people have circles that look more similar to them than not. And so you have to think about, well, when I walk into a room, where do I tend to walk first? Who's the first person that I tend to introduce myself to? These are all very natural human things that people do because people feel more comfortable with people they see as similar, but it causes us to miss out on a lot of really great opportunities to get to know people that are really worth knowing, but we have to really think ourselves out of our own bias. And so I think a really good place to start is to say, where are my blind spots? Who don't I have meaningful relationships with? What am I missing by not having that perspective represented in my life? And then also saying, now, how can I start to educate myself in that area so that moving forward, I either decrease my fear or hesitation to get to know individuals from that group, or if I'm working on a team or I come across someone like this in the workplace, that I'm likely to at least recognize my bias and work to overcome it in making decisions about that person. And I would not suggest going to people with that identity to ask them about it. I would suggest finding materials online, either reading materials or there are great YouTube resources, for example, that people can find to learn about and hear from people that have those lived experiences without having to like knock down your neighbor's door and say like, hey, your X identity, like, can you tell me about what that's like? Because that's an awkward and unnecessary thing to burden them with. But yeah, I think the education piece is what comes next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big thing, especially like last year. That's one of the things I was forced to look into. It's one of those things. I thought I was so woke because I'm an immigrant person of color, and I'm like, wait, as soon as you really don't know what you don't know. As soon as I started exploring my biases, and I'm like, whoa, I did not
Yeah.
see that at all.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is really interesting. I have a research study where I've interviewed a bunch of chief diversity officers along with one of my colleagues at GW. And it's really fascinating how a lot of chief diversity officers get into the role because they are positioned in an HR function and someone says, you know, hey, you hold a minority identity or what counts as a minority identity in the context of this organization. And so, you know, we want you to, you know, take on this chief diversity officer role. And they know from their lived experiences what you know, it might be like to be a minority in particular areas, but then they're like being asked to run employee resource groups of groups that they don't belong to, that they truly don't have a lot of education on, and they're like, I'm ill-equipped, right? And so it is always a constant learning process because none of us can be or live all of the identities that are encompassed in people. And also there's no monolithic story about one identity. There's no like, this is the story of women or this is the story of people of color, right? Like there's also going to be diversity in the community that needs to get represented. So there's a lot of layers, but I think it comes from doing some soul searching and then also asking a lot of questions and being open to learning.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. So one last thing here.
Sure.
Um, so what is a question that you wish more leaders asked when it comes
Yeah.
to when they're exploring all this?
Yeah, I think a question that I wish more leaders asked is what can I do to create an environment where you can be successful?
Hmm.
So that's really a key question. And also the part B of that is, and how are you defining success? Like what's your idea of success? So I'm not putting my definition of success onto you. I understand more about what your goals are and what you wish to achieve in your career. And then I'm also asking and open to feedback. What can I do to better facilitate those goals? And then work to figure out, okay, where's the synergy between what I can do to make the team the most effective as it can be? And also, what do I need to do from an individual mentoring perspective to make sure that individuals are feeling like they can achieve their potential and their goals on this team? And that sometimes means taking a chance on someone that really wishes to be a leader that you might need to put a little bit more time into or attention into that you would have maybe overlooked otherwise if you hadn't had that conversation. And it also means sometimes the reality that someone that you would like to be a leader doesn't have that goal, right? And so instead of planning for that person to follow in your footsteps because you see them as similar to you and you think they should have your role, that you sometimes need to take a step back and say, well, that's not really what that person wants. And it's not going to make either of us happy to force fit that, right? So um, really the individualization is really crucial, I think.
Yeah, that's something that's often overlooked, right? Like you see certain potential and you don't even think about what they really want. You're like, okay, I'm gonna post what I want on you, and you're gonna love it. You don't.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I think a lot of leaders get to the top because they are good at what they do. And so asking the question of what can I do better is not always a question that comes naturally or feels like a leader. A leader often feels like they need to already know what they can do better. They need to already know what the answer is. And in fact, there are lots of answers that you might not know that it's perfectly okay that you say, tell me what I can improve upon. And people could actually incorporate that into their leadership style, and that's actually better than trying to have all the answers.
Yeah, it's not something you hear all the time from leaders of
Yeah,
how can I do better? It's more of how can I make you do better?
right,
That's more of what
exactly.
they ask. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, what can I do to get you to do what I want you to do, kind of thing, is
Yeah.
instead of how do I understand what your goals are and create a situation where it's easier for you to attain them.
Mm. Right. Yeah. So let's get imaginative here a little bit. Okay. So say
Yeah.
sprinkle some magic into the computer, and everything you say can be heard by leaders all across the world. And what they hear, they actually hear, not just hear it, but really it registers. It pierces right through all these layers of whatever, pierces through, they hear it and they start implementing it right away. What would be your advice to them?
My advice would be that you are a human being. Everyone that's around you is a human being. You all have strengths and weaknesses. And without really getting to know yourself, including your weaknesses, and without getting to know others, including their strengths, you're never going to create a team that actually comes to its full potential. So be open to the idea that you have weaknesses and work to figure out what you need to do to address it. And be open to the idea that your team may have unexpected strengths that you haven't checked out yet that you need to get more information on. And once you're working with a full deck, you know all of the pieces of the puzzle, and you can continue working with that. Your team will function much better, but also people will feel much more included from an individualized perspective. So I think that that's probably what I would say.
Awesome. Yeah. So, Katina, I'd like to acknowledge you for the stand that you are for, creating these healthy workplaces where leaders and their team work together in in good flowing energy, and your stand for creating that space in your work. So, thank you for that.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate what
Yeah.
you're doing too, highlighting people's journeys. It's super cool. And I really appreciate being here.
Thank you. Awesome. So, before we say goodbye here, what is the best way our listeners could get in touch with you?
Sure. So you could email me at katinasawyer@gwu.edu, or you can reach out to contact at workerbeing, WORKRBEEING, or find us on our website, www.workerbeing.com. Again, WORKRBEEING.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have all that in the show notes. Again, thank you for your time. We appreciate you and we appreciate your work.
Thank you.